Live from the Gully Bar, the Steak and Lobster Grill at Sandy Point. This is Talking Point here on WESN Show. Michael Small. Once again, glad to be with you, all of our viewers, today. Unfortunately, like yesterday, it was a bit of a rainy morning, but I didn't necessarily want to stay cooped up inside. We're here on the beautiful Sister Isle, and at the very least, we would like to share a little bit, just a tiny bit, of the sights and sounds. The waves are crashing behind me constantly, but I've been told, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you think of it, you won't actually be able to hear the beautiful sounds of the ocean. Very soothing and relaxing, something that we need right now at a time where, well, at the end of the day, we just have to worry about what's going on in our country. Now, a quick update, not necessarily new news, but it seems, based on a family member of the Matura triple murder victims, a relative was basically saying, look, the young men were lying at home and they took an unconventional approach of wearing their jewelry, enjoying their possessions while indoors due to concerns of what might happen if they were to wear it outside on the streets publicly to display, well, one could say to display their wealth, but then the relative argued they had a small family business. It wasn't as though they were exactly wealthy per se. And at 1 a.m., it seems gunmen came in. Apparently, they were aware of the possessions of the victims. They came to rob them. And then I would, on my personal judgment, as of this moment, deem it as they executed them afterwards. Right now, that narrative seems to be the main one coming out of the situation. And it's one that is chilling, given the fact that at the end of the day, if you comply, you might still be in a situation where violence might affect you and you might lose your life. It's a potential sign of escalation that I was speaking about yesterday morning. And now to see it once again, that the indicators are murder due to sheer callousness and disregard for human rights, unnecessarily so. It just leaves one feeling a bit despondent when you think about the implications, because this potentially is not just an incident, but a direction. Now, with that said, there's more to speak about, some good news and some bad, but we will kick off today's Daily Review. And some minor good news with regards to our efforts at crime fighting. The U.S. State Department has released its trafficking in persons report, of which Trinidad and Tobago was upgraded from Tier 2 watch list to Tier 2. Now, the upgrade is a welcome situation here for us. I know a lot of people could be quite sensitive with regards to how foreign press and foreign governments view our situation, what's being said around the world. However, what is noted is why we weren't necessarily upgraded to Tier 1. While the U.S. State Department does acknowledge efforts are being made with regards to increasing investigations and prosecutions, increasing infrastructure, increasing facilities, housing units to help deal with trafficking victims, to provide them with support, it's still, because this is what came out last year, it still looks at corruption and official complicity in trafficking crimes by some in the police and national security services. Key points, including at more senior levels, remained to the U.S. State Department significant concerns because it inhibited law enforcement action. And the implication of this statement here, one would then wonder, would it be limited to human trafficking? Why would it be limited to human trafficking? And reasonably speaking, it probably would not be limited to human trafficking. Now, part of the question is exactly what information is the US using to source these reports, to come to these conclusions? And it's quite interesting because essentially, they're basically saying the people who we work with, or at least who our law enforcement officials might be working with to deal with transnational crimes in or around Trinidad and Tobago. Potentially, some of those same people could be involved in human trafficking rings. To whatever degree, to some extent, I'm not sure if it matters, if we're basically saying there are arms not just of the state, but of the protective services that are complicit in this. And then, of course, they're going to say efforts to address these things remained inadequate and resulted in re-trafficking. And now I do have to ask the question, what is it that the US knows that we potentially do not know? Of course, we know a lot. There are a lot of rumors. Everybody knows something about a little bit, and they heard a story about a minister, a story about an official, or what have you. But we have yet to be able to prove it in a court of law or even take it to a court of law. So the question is, what is it that the US knows that we potentially don't know? And to some extent, is there any mechanism that will potentially allow us to know? If the US just reveals things publicly, that could be in some ways bad, not just for those who perpetrated the offenses, but bad all around, right? It might not necessarily be the responsible thing just to release or leak information like that, especially if it might not necessarily be verifiable. Innocent until proven guilty, I always say, is the standard. But they feel strongly enough about it. So then now the next question is, to what extent does this affect our international relationships? At the end of the day, are the Americans looking at for the devil's horns out of the heads of our Trinidadian officials when they meet up with them? I don't know. All right, moving on to another story, still dealing with crime to some extent, as we're on the style. Of course, Chief Secretary and outgoing Secretary of Finance for the THA, Fali Augustine, delivered his budget presentation yesterday. One of the things that came up was the talk of a Tobago police force. Now, we get into the rest of the budget presentation later on in the show, but a Tobago police force is an interesting question, one which I said deserves consideration, although on a practical level, I'm not entirely sure if it's at all feasible. At the end of the day, a local police service, and right now it seems that the conversation is with regards to a municipal police force, which, if we are concerned about crime fighting, to what extent will they impact the violent crime on the island? Right now, violent crime in Trinidad, I don't think anyone is really looking at municipal police to deal with. Obviously, if they run into a situation, well, then they run into a situation. But we're looking at the more equipped, better trained units of the TTPS to deal with certain aspects of violent crime. And I don't expect a municipal police force, which is, I believe, what both the Chief Secretary as well as the head of the Tobago Business Chamber have been speaking about. Now, if we're talking about petty crime and the like, and maybe then by shifting those responsibilities to a municipal police for Tobago, you might then free up TTPS assets, personnel resources to deal with more violent crime. Maybe that should be the ultimate practical angle that it should take. The flip side, of course, is one could argue the THA is in many ways, on a practical level, similar to a local government body. Other local government bodies who have lesser responsibilities have municipal police forces. Why not Tobago? So it's an interesting question, but at the end of the day, I think any sort of Tobago police force would be limited. On a practical level, it would still have to train in the same areas. Of course, now the budget for the Tobago Regional Police Service, as it has been coined, a name has been coined, I think, by Mr. George. Who's going to pay for it? Will it be central government? Will it be the THA? And to some extent, making a new service, I don't think is going to alleviate some of the resource and budgetary issues. It's not going to necessarily change, like I said, the training, right? Or for the most part, the procedures. So I really don't know exactly what the expectations are for this initiative. And I do wonder if the expectations might either be unreasonable, not due to politics, but due to just practicality, or if it just hasn't been thought out. So the proponents so far don't necessarily know exactly what should be the final version of this concept, just that they feel the need to have it. And I do hope that it doesn't end up being something that is going to exist for the sake of existing, to say we did a thing, we did give Tobago a police service, and if it's not done properly, then it probably won't work out very well. And then a lot of people, a lot of detractors will come out and say, see, why we bother with this in the first place? I mean, it could essentially end up in a similar situation to the SRRIC, the Secondary Roads Rehabilitation Improvement Company. And that was basically folded after 2 years because it was redundant. So if violent crime is the issue in Tobago, ultimately, even if you bring a municipal type police service, that's not directly addressing violent crime. So other measures would be needed to deal with that. Measures which I'm not entirely sure, maybe the discussions happens behind closed doors, but we haven't necessarily heard anything publicly about it. Of course, the level of violence is relative, so arguably, we should even ask the question, will increasing resources of the police presence in Tobago make a difference? Because if it's not about a resource shortage and the problems come from other factors, there are other sources to this situation, well then we're essentially debating something that may not actually matter because it's not necessarily going to help. Now, with that said, let's take a break. When we come back, we will get to the next topics on the Daily Review. Gonna go through some topics from yesterday, which I wasn't able to get through, like the Tobago police question, but also we have a few new things that have popped up on your radar. And then, of course, my co-host should be joining me, and we'll have a discussion over several political topics that I haven't gotten to yet either. Stay tuned to Talk About on WESN. We'll be right back after this.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And to get through some stories that I wasn't able to get through to yesterday, but I think are still important that I want to comment on. First off, well, just last Friday, I was speaking to Kevin Ramnarayan about the debt financing government was basically, it seems, right? I'm not sure if they directly said this, but it seems the government of Trinidad and Tobago issued bonds in order to collect enough revenue to try to make up with the deficit, both with regards to our budget as well as with regards to our reducing foreign exchange reserves. Now, Monday, I read the report that the Minister of Finance signed a memorandum of understanding with the Exim Bank for financial and technical support, but more focusing on the financial for several projects that could, so we're not sure what the actual figure is yet, could be less, could be more, but it could, in the first instance, amount to US $500 million, which the bond issue was 750 million US. So now the question is, to what extent is this financial support going to be a grant or it's going to be a loan? Are we going to be in further debt? And the first instance is US 500 million. So now the plans for these things, you know, they have certain items that I would agree that we should, if possible, spend more on. The source of the funds is where it gets tricky, and that will then directly relate to how much more we could spend on cybersecurity, maritime border management, aka, you know, our ocean border security, renewable energy, water and sanitation, and national security. So to some extent, that last bit, national security, might be redundant, or the maritime border management might be redundant, although managing your maritime borders probably includes Coast Guard patrols, not just for trying to interdict smuggling and the like, but also for search and rescue, etc., etc. And just overall management of our sea lanes, international traffic, international ships coming in and out of our waters, which then does tie into national security. Cybersecurity ties into national security. So that seems to be a big chunk of this, at least that's what's been reported. Water and sanitation is interesting because I do believe that, and I brought up this point last week to some extent, is our environment now going to force government to have to change their spending habits and invest more into water infrastructure after what we saw this past dry season? Now, we've had bad dry seasons in the past, not just this year, but in years gone by. Usually, though, at some point we rebound, and the expectation with the following year won't be quite as bad. I'm not too sure if we should make that assumption in this case. This is where things get tricky. So to some extent, now, it's a catch-22. If you spend the money and we didn't necessarily need the extra infrastructure, arguably the opportunity costs would be quite high for the government. We could have spent that money somewhere else where it was needed. The flip side, of course, is what if next year we have just as dry or drier dry season? We might be in problems. The one item, the one project area that I'm not necessarily, I don't know if I agree with, is with regards to renewable energy. We already have projects coming down the pipe, and I actually do think it would be better to just let those projects develop and mature so that we ourselves build up an institutional knowledge of how to implement these things, operate these things, maintain these things, and then when necessary, dispose of the various components that are no longer of any value due to their nature. It could be quite important how they're disposed of, toxicity of solar panels, etc. But to invest more money into renewable energy now, I'm not entirely sure if I agree with it. We do need to invest in renewable energy because we do need to plan for when our fossil fuel revenues dry up and then it becomes more expensive to import LNG in order to drive our energy generation. So regionally, I think renewables is a very important long-term issue for the Caribbean as a whole, not just TNT. But in the immediate term, I don't know if it's the most efficient way. And at the end of the day, who knows what else this potential money might be used for? To what extent will we be liable to pay it back? How much? What's the rate? What's the interest rate if we have to, etc., etc. We'll see how it goes. But I guess at the end of the day, you could spin this as a positive or a negative. I'll leave it up to you to decide. We need more financial help, or this is just more resources to play with in order to get certain projects done. Now, last couple of stories that I want to hit. First, it was nice to see the opposition support the government and a bill to use polygraph testing, drug testing, and biometric identification for members of the protective services, as well as certain officers or office holders within the judicial, legal service, and civil service. A bill was passed in Parliament unanimously, and it was good to see. Now, the opposition is still skeptical about the bill. They have their criticisms of it. We can understand that. But at least in my mind, this is the first time I've seen both sides of the aisle come together, per se. And I do wonder to what extent now could this be a sign that maybe politicians are realizing, look, we can't just oppose for opposing's sake. At some point, it'll look bad to the moderates, to the undecided voters, who are going to think that, you know, both parties are very polarizing and are very inconsiderate, not very helpful, not very willing to compromise. And perhaps this is the opposition trying to paint itself to the undecided voters, to the ones who are not diehard red or yellow, that, hey, we could compromise, we could assist, we could come together, we could extend the olive branch and help the government pass something that is seen as important. Because right now, up until this moment, I would have said with regards to crime, it seems as though they just want to play politics with it, both sides. So we'll see how effective this bill might be, because it's to deal in part with police corruption. And will these testing methods, not necessarily, yes, polygraph testing has its limitations, but it's utilized, it has its effectiveness, but rather the implementation based on the legislation passed, will that be effective? And then the last thing to mention quickly, 7 suspects who were allegedly in videos by YouTuber Christmas List have been, I believe, arrested, and they have been charged under the Anti-Gang Act under suspicion of being members of a gang. This is somewhat good to see, at the very least, because finally we're charging people for being in a gang when it's been illegal to be in a gang for how long in this country? I can't even remember at this point. Now, one of the things that you might wonder about is the delay. Christopher Hughes was arrested weeks ago, and now the 7 suspects are arrested within the last couple of days. The thing about it is, one could argue, well, look, the cases were different. Maybe law enforcement was afraid that Mr. Hughes would essentially leave the country before they could even initiate any sort of arrest warrant for him. And the burden of proof for the anti-gang legislation, from what I understand, is potentially prohibitively high. And it might be one of the stumbling blocks legislatively to the crime fighting process. Whereas potentially some of the charges that Christopher Hughes was facing may have been easier to prove, but sedition, of course, was what he was eventually charged with. That's what he's before the courts for, and that's a tricky situation. We've discussed that in the past. So the timing of it, one could argue, look, it's funny how after the outcry they are arrested, but it would have taken time. It would have taken time to do a criminal investigation. Maybe Christopher Hughes' arrest was premature, but at least now a precedent has been said, hey, we've actually made some more arrests on the anti-gang bill. So hopefully it's a good sign. And again, I would say hopefully it's a trend in the right direction, but we have to wait and see. All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll get deeper into the politics here in TNT. Stay tuned to talk about the WSN. We'll be right back after this.
7 is out, all day is in. WESN News on the hour.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. From concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming, and virtual conferencing, we are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
And we're back here talking about on WESN, and when it rains, it pours. It's a hell of a thing, because at the end of the day, both mornings here, the last 2 days have been quite rainy. But then, you know, once we get 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, the sun comes out. I do wish it was out here so you could see a prettier picture. But I do know somebody who, despite the weather, probably wishes he was here with me. And I am, of course, speaking of my co-host, the one and only, the indomitable Mr. Keaton Shaw. Good morning, Keaton.
Good morning, Sean Michael Small. Looks like it's raining crabs and goats in Tobago.
Well, Keaton, I don't know why, but your audio sounds as though you're talking to me behind a closed door.
That's because I'm behind two closed doors. It's
guys, something happened with this audio, and it doesn't sound like if I'm hearing it through his mic. I don't know if we could just.
All right, we will try. We'll certainly try to adjust that.
There we go.
Right? Yeah, definitely, indeed. Sean Michael Small, how are you doing? Good morning to you.
Well, I'm dry. Surprisingly, there was a break in the rain for me to get where I am. So I'm dry, and I'm very thankful for that, because I had to carry a few bits of electronics to where I am. Other than that, you know, things are pretty good. Well, at least the rain, Keaton, brings the cool, right? And you know, I mean, as hot as it gets in Trinidad, it's just as hot, or sometimes it feels more so in Tobago.
Indeed, indeed. But you said this in your introduction. You're in a position where I would actually want to be. I absolutely love the Sister Isle. And yes, I'm a bit jealous of the fact that you're there. You're going to be there for a number of weeks. But, you know, I think the only consolation is that I've got a roof above me while you've got to deal with some of that rain and some of that wind.
Well, with that said, let's get into it. Speaking of Tobago, the budget was passed for the THA. The outgoing Secretary of Finance, he has estimated the upcoming national budget, and he's hoping for 5.8% of it, which, based on his estimation, is looking for 3.956 billion TT dollars. A lot of that, 2.8 for just recurring expenditure alone, and approximately 1 billion for development programs, which one could argue Tobago is sorely in need of, but so too the rest of the country. Keaton, when you heard these estimates, do you think that the Chief Secretary / Secretary of Finance made some reasonable estimates to base his budget on, or is he potentially either thinking pie in the sky with regards to the government's budget or with regards to what the government might be willing to allocate to Tobago?
Well, I think it's a couple of things to factor in. My first opinion, based off of what I heard during the Chief Secretary's presentation yesterday, is that his final budget presentation as the Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy was rather ambitious. But this is a theme that he has certainly ran with since his first budget presentation back in 2022. That being said, however, he has referred to the fact that it's an election year, and usually what we experience is an election budget. So he's asking the government, really, he's played his cards, and he said, listen, we know what to expect in an election year. We want our piece of it in Tobago. Will he get it? I don't think he'll get it. I don't think he'll get anywhere near close to 5.8% of the national budget. But overall, Tobago is in desperate need of development. And as you mentioned, the large chunk of the budget, 2/3 plus, was actually that for recurrent expenditure. He has not spoken much to his plans for, at least the impression I got yesterday. He hasn't given much details in respect to the development expenditure. Even when he was speaking about a new airline, he didn't give much details in respect to that. He spoke also about expenses for healthcare in Tobago. He gave some details in respect to that. He spoke about the Revenue Authority, and his position against the Revenue Authority. But what he has indicated is that he has some concerns. He's willing to meet with the Prime Minister. He wants to meet with the Prime Minister. We'll see whether or not that happens. But generally speaking, Sean Michael Small, very ambitious on his part. It plays into what he's. It's essentially he's continued with what he has asked for since entering office. I don't think that he is going to get it, and whether or not it's an election year.
Well, one of the things that you brought up, the point that the Chief Secretary made, it's an election year. But the thing is, if the central government gives the THA money, more money for an election year, but then the THA is run by the TPP, what would happen if the TPP will put candidates up for the 2 Tobago seats? So that alone makes me think, unless the TPP has decided not to contest anything in the national elections, not the 2 Tobago seats at the very least, I think on a very cutthroat level way of thinking, right, brutally honest, why would government then provide an election budget to a political rival, essentially? Because right now, as weak as some people would say the UNC is, including us, there's no real way to know how the voters will go, because so far the government has done unpopular things and they are primed to be voted out. These 2 seats in Tobago have been seen since the last general election as being key factors in the next race because of the uncertainty and the margin of victory the government had the last time. 2 seats potentially could make all the difference now.
Sean, listen, to add context to what you're saying, it's going to be very difficult to call those 2 seats in Tobago. I know that Shamfa Cudjoe still remains quite popular in Tobago. I mean, overall, the Prime Minister does not seem to have much favor amongst Tobagonians. And that's just speaking for, and hearing the thoughts and opinions from Tobagonians on the ground. And that's the impression that I get. I could be absolutely wrong. But it's that seat that Ayanna Webster Roy that holds. If the TPP go up for an election, and I think they may actually challenge for those 2 seats in a general election, I really think that they will. It's Ayanna Webster Roy's seat that is the one that could swing. Shamfa Cudjoe seems to be a bit more popular. I don't know, only time will tell. I mean, the campaign, Sean, has just started on the part of the teacher. As much as this is something that we've grown accustomed to with the Chief Secretary presenting a budget over the last few years, that to me also signals their campaign. TPP internal elections are due very soon. He's going unopposed as political leader. We will see what happens there. Going back to the core issue, that is the budget, and his asking of 5.8% of the national budget. I just want you to bear in mind something. The Chief Secretary, since entering office, has always asked for the higher end, of the allocated, what Tobago should be allocated in respect to percentage of the budget. He's generally done that. He has not gotten that. He's even reflected at the fact that they've asked for so much money. I think it was over 100 million during the mid-year budget review. They were only allocated approximately $50 million. You have to understand something. The Minister of Finance himself has indicated that things are going to be a bit difficult. He has suggested that things are going to be a bit difficult. Now, he said that if things are going to get difficult, I really wonder what the last 5-6 years have been. I don't know what that is compared to what difficult actually is going to be. But if the Minister of Finance has already hinted at that, the Chief Secretary, again, this is why I use the word ambitious. It's because he is calling out on the government. The question is, are Tobagonians listening to the Chief Secretary, or are they fed up with the Chief Secretary playing these political games?
Well, I would also wonder, my last question, because I want to move on to the next topics, would be with regards to property tax. From what I understand, that's supposed to be for local government, collected by local government. And I'm not entirely sure why the Chief Secretary opposes it, because potentially, if it comes online in Tobago, it should go to the THA. That's what I always thought, but it also was something I believe has not necessarily been addressed in a definitive manner, because so far, what we get is talk from the local government ministry, but as far as I'm aware, they don't deal with Tobago, despite the fact that Tobago is kind of a halfway between its own executives, but then also a local government body. So I said, well, yes, other local government bodies have municipal police, why not Tobago? And I also thought that it would have benefited the THA to have property tax, unless somehow the Chief Secretary thinks that the government is trying to have property tax, but unlike the rest of the country, take the property tax themselves out of Tobago, which I don't expect that to be the case. If it is, I could understand the hesitation for not wanting property tax, but I can't necessarily agree with it on the basis of just if property tax is implemented as we expect it to be, it should be more money for the THA, unless the Chief Secretary is basically saying, look, my people, the people that live here, can't afford to have an extra burden placed on them right now. In which case, I can understand that argument as well. Then we have the question, should we just postpone property tax at all? Because there's talk that property tax might be postponed in general for the next election to come after it. It's unpopular. It's an election year. Why implement it now? People aren't going to like it. And ironically, this goes into the next topic, Ethan, where some people are interpreting the Prime Minister's words. He essentially used the word standby with regards to potentially implying stand by and be ready for the election, for any election coming up. But the one that is next on the horizon is the general. How likely do you think this actually might come to pass, that we could have a snap election well before when it is supposedly due next year? August, I believe, is the limit. So
what I have been hearing before the Prime Minister even made those comments, it was being suggested through the grapevines that the Prime Minister was considering calling an election before this year's budget presentation on the part of the Minister of Finance. It's very interesting how you articulated that property tax is so unpopular, it may be delayed until after a general election, which is, as you mentioned, due in 2025. But the Prime Minister, from what I was hearing, may call the election before the budget presentation. If that is the case, you remember he has to do so, I think, at least 90 days before the election date. So he has to call it very soon, I think within this week, within the very beginning of July, if that is going to be the case. The likelihood, though, of a snap general election being called, you see, Sean Michael Small, snap general elections don't necessarily work in anyone's favor. One, if you take a look at, you use this example, if you were Patrick Manning calling a snap general election, look at what happened there. Right now, if we look at it globally in the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak has called a snap general election. All polls are showing that he's going to face a heavy defeat. It's a similar thing happening in France. So generally speaking, snap general elections don't always favor the incumbent. However, there are two sides to this entire story. One, does anyone want to get into government? Given the current situation that we're facing and dealing with, would any political party or any established political party want to get into power to deal with the situation? It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of difficult political decisions. They're going to have to make the tough decisions, which is why it's easy for anyone to be in opposition. Anyone would be glad to be in opposition. They would not look like the bad guys. The second aspect of this entire story is, right now, you said it yourself, the People's National Movement government are not necessarily popular. There is still support. There will always be support for the political party. But, they've fallen out of favor with many, and things have become very, very frustrating here indeed. That's putting it very lightly. But in my opinion, what we've seen happening with the United National Congress as the major opposition party, what we've seen in terms of a lack of vigor from the other political parties that exist, for example, Hope, NTA, just to name two, it all plays in favor to the People's National Movement. They seem stronger on paper right now. So what the Prime Minister is thinking, one could only take a good guess, because it could swing anyway.
Well, and I do wonder at the very least if he throws that out there, one, to hype up his voter base, his party members, so that they don't become complacent and then they're trying to put work in at the last minute. It's like, let's start putting the work in now. But then the other thing is, I don't know if it maybe puts pressure, as you're pointing to the other political parties, who now, they have to, at the very least, consider, should we be ready? Like, what if he does call it and we're caught with our pants down? We can't afford for that to happen. So we need to also start to get ready to contest. But of course, the difference is they have to be a bit more paranoid with regards to their timing and try to be ready, I don't know, anytime within the next 3 months, maybe. So one of the things that I do find interesting is, because you pointed out, trying to get it done before the budget. Is it that the bulk of the value is going to be, if we get it out, if we have it before the budget, then they kind of protect themselves from any fallout from the next national budget? Or would it still be useful, even if they have the budget presentation, because they should be able to spin the bad news that might come out of the next budget enough so that they don't lose too much ground?
Spin the bad news, you say. Listen, Sean, if it's anything that I have learned over the last few years, especially in this position, having to watch budget presentations from beginning to end, you get very little information. You get more analysis following with the conversations. You get very little information. It's a similar thing that happened yesterday with the Chief Secretary, where at the beginning he went on and on focusing about achievements on the part of the THA in the last year at least, and even during the entirety of his administration's term. That being said, he has every right to do so. I'm not saying anything is wrong with that, but it's a similar thing last year when we saw column inverts. It's a similar thing in 2022. Again, the preamble tends to be so long, you get lost in the actual budget presentation, even in respect to the allocations to the various ministries. So you're saying spin the bad news. It's going to happen anyway. Whether it's before an election or after an election, it's going to happen anyway. The preamble is going to be excessive. We're going to hear only news that they want us to in respect to this is what we've done, this is what we were able to do. It's going to bore you. Put it that way. That is a tactic by anyone who a budget presentation is not supposed to be so long. It's not supposed to be so long. And a preamble shouldn't dominate a budget. So you're saying that they're going to spin the bad news, whether it's before the election or after the election, that there is a budget presentation. It doesn't matter. It really, really doesn't matter. As far as I am concerned, at this point in time, you could go on an election before the budget or after a budget. Our financial situation isn't going to get better anytime soon. Even the Minister of Finance has hinted at that.
Keaton, you started off your last topic or your last response questioning, you know, or saying something like you don't necessarily mind how it's presented. I think it's presented badly. I do mind. I do mind the way how they do it. And I think it's crafted very badly. But with that said, you also touched on earlier the fact that the dynamics of the situation. So we're going to move on to the third topic. The dynamics of the situation has to include, of course, the legitimacy of the threats of the opposition party to challenge the next general, which I think is probably greater than you or I could have predicted at the start of Talking Points conception. But there's still questions about it, and I think at this point it came up with regards to the stability of the UNC and the appearance of the UNC now having more cracks in it coming out of the internal, and with Rai Ragbir breaking ranks, voting with the government on a piece of legislation which seemingly he did not inform anybody beforehand. So it took his opposition colleagues by surprise. And the question, of course, now comes, could Kamala Prasad be set up for to lose another general? But more importantly, and I think this is where it has evolved, because before the expectation would have been, well, if she loses a general, at this point in time, it'll be hard to see how she could retain the political leadership of the UNC. But one other political leader of another party offered the opinion in the daily newspapers this morning that this could fracture the UNC. This could destroy the UNC if they lose at this point in time, because to some extent, internally, lines have been drawn between those that want the status quo and those that don't. And now we have to ask, to what extent is that division, is that gap, how deep it is, how wide it is, and will now a situation that would have just been changing the leader, will it actually have wider repercussions? What do you think about that?
If you're asking me about Kamala Prasad Bisesa as the political leader of the United National Congress, just asking for clarity on your exact questioning.
What was that?
What is the exact question that you're asking?
So the thing is, it has gone beyond if Kamala loses the next general, because there will be a third defeat. We would expect for the political leadership of the UNC to change. But with the divisions we've seen internally with the party, I believe it was Philip Edward Alexander, and not to judge the statement by the source, but for the basis of the premise, there's so much division in the UNC, a loss in our next general election could potentially fracture the UNC. Do you think that's possible?
Fracture the UNC? How much more you want to fracture the UNC?
How much more? Where it doesn't exist as a party?
No. Listen, you have to understand, the United National Congress exists simply because of its grassroots support. It still exists because of that. It also exists because it is the main opposition party, right? Losing a next general election, listen, the United National Congress has essentially put itself in a position where we will accept election losses and nothing will change. We will just accept it. In fact, I think most recently, I'm hearing from MP Michelle Benjamin, who's making an argument that the UNC lost the by-election in Indian Walk because Muslims were celebrating Eid, right? And I kept thinking, wow, okay, great. That's great, excellent. I can't believe this is what you are now projecting out there. Anyway, Sean Michael Small, the United National Congress is fractured it can't get any more fractured. The party will exist, but the party will not change. I don't think the opposition leader is going to give up anytime soon. She has not. In fact, just recently, she campaigned with a slate that won overwhelmingly. The party members that came out to vote voted in favor of the slate that Kamla Persad-Bissessar endorsed. And one has to wonder if Kamla Persad-Bissessar didn't endorse that slate, what the election might have turned out to be. You never know. You don't know. You could take an educated guess. But Sean Michael Small, the UNC could afford to lose a next election. They could, because they simply don't care whether or not they lose elections. They could afford to lose an election because they do not care whether or not they lose an election.
Well,
Hold on. What happens is that we as voters, we cannot afford to lose any opportunity that may shift the direction that TNT is currently heading.
Well, think about it. For the voters, the opportunity might not be to vote in the opposition or to vote back the PNM. The opportunity might be for one of those two parties, and it's less likely to be the PNM, but it's not impossible, to disappear, for lack of a better way. Basically, similar to how the PDP was able to become the second party in Tobago. The other opposition parties to the PNM essentially became non-existent, and the PDP took their place. So now I'm wondering, because we seem to be unable to have any desire to look for an alternative.
Tobago's politics, the dynamics of Tobago's politics is very much different to the dynamics of national politics, sir. You have to just bear that in mind. It's very much different. There's another factor in this that we have not spoken about, Sean Michael Small, and it's the PNM executive elections. Their national executive elections are due. The leader, if I am not mistaken, the role of political leader is not up for contention. But the reason why I say hold on to your horses is because Dr. Keith Rowley ran in the last internal election for political leader. He made the argument saying, if I'm Prime Minister of the country, how could I not be leading my party? But when at his swearing-in ceremony back in 2020, he said this will be my last term. So one has to wonder what is going to happen there. Is he actually going to call an election for the leadership role of the party? Could he do that according to the party's constitution? Is he going to lead the PNM in the next general elections? All of that is part of this entire equation that we have not necessarily addressed.
Yeah, because from what it was said, his position as political leader will be up for election internally, I believe within the next 2 years, because it's a 4-year term apparently, and it's disconnected from the national or the general election. So it'll be interesting to see. But with that said, quick question to close the segment, Keaton. We saw the numbers from the UNC internal elections. To some extent, would it be a bad sign if the PNM voters do not come out in at least as much numbers?
I honestly, Sean Michael Small, I think people are so disenfranchised with the current political organizations. I really do not look at the internal numbers. I'm looking more so to the numbers that we see at the general elections, and I expect it, unless in particular young people decide that they're actually going to come out and vote. And we see more people acting with a great sense of interest in the landscape that TNT finds itself in and is going down. I expect the numbers to be low as well. But you never know. I could be wrong. I've been wrong many a times before, and I would love to be proven wrong again.
I mean, I think you and I would both agree more young people involved in the political process of TNT would be a welcome addition. Other parts of the world, you could argue maybe young people are too involved, but here in TNT, they are not involved enough, and hope for the future. If they are the future leaders and they don't want to be involved in politics.
You know, sometimes I wonder if you wanted to raise the retirement age to 65 for public servants. Theoretically speaking, you know, these politicians are public servants, and what whether or not that is a way of getting them to retire as well at 65. You know, go on, you did your time, you did your time, you didn't necessarily do what we hoped that you were going to do, so, you know, just retire and enjoy your life, because you're sitting in Parliament and It's us that's really suffering. But what can I do? Listen, Sean Michael Small, to close this segment, put it this way. As far as I am concerned, no political party has given any sort of concrete plan going forward. None of them have given any sort of concrete plan. It's not because they can't. I mean, you can have a debate whether or not they're capable of doing that. It's not because they don't have they don't have a clue. Again, it's debatable. My humble opinion is simple. They don't care. Why put forward a concrete plan when we don't care? We run an election. If we win, we win. If not, we sit in opposition and enjoy the benefits and perks of being a parliamentarian. Simple.
I think at the end of the day, I won't be surprised if the PNM just happens to be voted out. We'll get more or less similar decisions from the new government, whoever they might be, most likely the UNC. And that's really what bothers me with this upcoming general election. The fact that even if there is technically change, we might not actually have practically any difference.
I dare anyone to predict the outcome of the next election.
But like I just said, to me, I'm wondering if it really matters if we just look at it from who gets in, PNM or UNC. And that's why we need more. That's why I'm asking for more. You're asking for more. A lot of people are asking for more options. Folks, we take a break. When we come back, you'll have a chance to call in, ask us questions, have your say. Stay tuned to Talk About WESN. Show Michael Small, Keaton Shaw, Tobago, Gataga Street Connection. We'll be right back after this.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really want
to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren. Coming soon to WESN.
And we're back here, Sean Michael Small on the Sister Isle, in the Galley Bar of the Steak and Lobster Grill. Keaton Shaw at WSN Studios on Gataga Street. And now is the time we open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you, the viewer. You could have your say on any topic that we spoke about or any topic in general. Maybe there's something that we didn't touch on today that you think is pressing and needs some attention. Feel free to do that. Feel free to say where you disagree with us. Just want you remain respectful. Of course, you could call and disagree with something another public official or public persona said within any sort of media outlet. However, again, I would caution, please be respectful with regards to any and all comments made on air. Let's have constructive discussions with one another. Keaton Shaw.
Sean Michael Small, it seems as though the weather is not getting any better.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. You know, it's getting a little bit better. It's getting a little bit better. Still cool, which I'm grateful for. Although mornings here, right at the coast on Tobago, where the southern end, it could get quite windy. It could still be a bit comfortable.
Well, I'll tell you what, to settle your nerves a little bit, we've got our first caller on the line with us from Faizabad. Good morning, caller.
Hi, good morning, gentlemen. Good morning to the
Morning.
Tobago.
Good morning.
Sean Michael Small Keaton Shah. I would have listened to your discourse this morning with respect to the UNC, which I respect very much. But I must remind you that the UNC is guided by a constitution that they have that would take care of the alleged dissidents, inclusive of Mr. Roy Ragbell. So I think we can rest that case. With respect to the strength, that will be determined when the election bell is rung. But the more important is that I would have seen last night where the opposition leader would have presented some information to the nation which needs to be investigated with respect to the Indian businessman who is showing interest in the oil refinery. I read on the newspaper, Dr. Rowley is saying, similarly to what happened with Delcy Rodriguez and company when they came in the country, the dead of the night, and he wasn't aware who came. He is saying he's unaware that this gentleman has 3 charges pending for money laundering and what have you in India. Now, I would have seen photographs taken in front of the diplomatic center with Stuart Young and this same gentleman. It is alleged that it was taken on the 23rd of March, 2023. So this man has been doing business in Trinidad for a little while. You know, and they make it sound like it's very new. Further investigation would have revealed, it is alleged that he has interest in Venezuela. He would have acquired some iron ore company in Venezuela, and so they are looking at it as he's being the conduit with this oil deal and the refinery, similar to what happened to Riperti and company. So, gentlemen, I think these are the important facts that we're supposed to be looking at, rather than, quarreling about the UNC and the state or their status. We have a government in power that we have to hold to account. You see what I mean? So I hope that Oli will do some investigation and bring to the public the truth or the untruth of this matter. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller.
I
am not disregarding your point, caller. You're absolutely right. We do have a government in power that we do have to hold accountable. And this show does have a role to play. Sean Michael Small and I do have a role to play. And you have raised some points in respect to that. But at the same time, are you satisfied with the opposition holding the government accountable? Right? I asked you that question in the sense that they raised some points last night. The opposition has raised many a point in the past. It's died a natural death, ANT&T. That's what happens. And before I continue, I'd like to point out the fact that approximately 2 weeks ago, I had Devendranath Thakur on AM Prime. I interviewed him. He spoke about $70 billion being enough to fix all of TNT's problems. I welcomed him to the program. I asked him to put forward his suggestions. In fact, in other words, counteract as the opposition what the Minister of Finance was presenting. Do you know what his response to me was? That is not his job, that he is in opposition. So you're absolutely right. We have a role to play. But this is why I will be critical of the United National Congress. Because in my humble opinion, though they have raised some points, they have not been consistent in holding the government accountable. I hope that the points they raised last night in respect to the Indian businessman is not just for a topic for a Monday night forum. Let's see what they do with that as opposition, as holding the government account. We have another caller on the line with us. Good morning, caller.
Hey, morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
I want to present the case why I will not be voting.
Interesting.
Because on one hand, Keith Rowley is presenting himself as Mr. Squeaky Clean. because he could show you everything wrong that the opposition doing. But whenever you find him dealing with questionable people and questionable dealings, he don't know the people and all kind of nonsense. The second thing is this. The government have public-private partnerships, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why is it the union and the government could not have come together and come up with a plan to run the refinery instead of closing it down and sending people home? I would like somebody to ask that question and get answered from me, please. Because if you're really concerned about the welfare of your people and the refinery running at a loss, some way, somehow you could find a way. So let's say it at 1,000. Let's say they could run on 1,000 people, and the staff is 5,000. You could come to everybody and let them know, yeah, what's going on. We want to cut the staff down to 2,500 because we want to at least break even. So it's either all it take a salary cut or some people will have to go home. But I don't want this thing to close down. If these people really had Trinidad and Tobago's development at heart, Tobago wouldn't be pandering and begging for money when Tobago is supposed to be. Watch my Tobago, it's supposed to have 4 fast ferries and 2 cargo vessels, you know. Plus a dockyard down in the west, you know. The kind of money that we spend in here. And the last thing I want to close on is the non-disclosure agreements. We have to do something about that, you know, because when the agreements do come to light, like in the Sandals case, it's taxpayers' money you take in. You understand, right? To go and build a business to bring in people to run. That can't work. It's time for the people to have a greater say in what is taking place here with the MPs. The MPs is representing a constituency and our votes, but they're not entertaining our views, they're following the party views. That's why I would not
can I just ask you, if you said that how it's time for people to take a greater interest or take greater account, why is it that you wouldn't vote? That's every opportunity for you to do exactly what you're saying people need to do.
Because I am cutting off my both hands. I am voting for people who are supposed to have my best interests at heart, but they don't. Action speaks louder than words. If Trinidadians stop talk and just observe and see what is going on, you might realize it's a fire sale they're looking to start here. Because how could the refinery not be good enough for the locals to run it and the locals to be working in it, but good for foreign bandits to come and take it? Have a good day, gentlemen.
Have a good day, caller. Thank you very much.
I want to say, in the example that you gave, where maybe it's supposed to be 1,000 workers and it's 5,000 and they should start to downsize the workforce in order to keep the refinery viable, which others have questioned the government's motivations and the viability of the refinery as how the government said it. But that example you gave, I'm pretty certain the union would never have agreed to that. And that's one of the reasons why I dislike how certain unions operate in TNT. They're not going to give up the jobs, because by doing that, you give up dues, you give up financial consideration paid to the unions themselves, you give up members, you give up influence. And of course, the members themselves, as far as they're concerned, the union is supposed to protect them from that very sort of thing. No one is telling them, no one is leading them to say, listen, maybe we need to keep the entity viable so that you still have an entity to employ you, and that's how you secure your jobs. But we don't necessarily think in those terms. That's not a Trinidad and Tobago problem. That's a human problem.
Well, Sean, I will agree with you in saying that, in my humble opinion, you could present to the unions the fact that, okay, listen, we're going to keep the refinery running. We're going to have to cut the staff in half, though, rather than send all the staff at home. And the unions will still object to that. That's a difficulty. That's always been we have another call. I want you to continue that point.
I just want to say, that's essentially what happened. The union said no retrenchment. The union said no wage cuts. And then, by the 3rd year, the union was begging, please don't shut down Petrotrin.
And just to bear in mind, the point that the caller raised, the Prime Minister, when questioned about the questionable court matters against this particular Indian businessman who's interested in the now defunct refinery, to then respond by practically saying that you weren't aware. Does nobody do any background checks or due diligence anymore? I mean, the first thing that engineer certificates are corrected to even for even a job application. But anyway, let's take Claxton Bay first. We have a caller line with us from Claxton Bay. Good morning, caller.
Morning, Sean. Morning, Keaton.
Good morning.
Morning.
How is Tobago?
Well, it's sunny now. Like, you know, it's been so.
You know, we had a few days ago a boat accident again on the Maroga area.
I'm not sure if I saw that.
No, go on, caller.
Go ahead, caller.
It had an incident and a guy get killed. Yeah. You see,
I think I heard that.
It have regulation, but to enforcing the laws, because it have the size of the engine used in the pirogue.
Yes.
In the pirogue, the size of engine used in the pirogue. And nobody regulating that, you know, the engine is, so the size of the pirogue was a big engine. And when you run them pirogue, you can't see in front of you, you know.
Yeah.
You could have the experience. And when that boat crashed, they said the guy had lights and everything. But when this guy them run them 200 horsepower on a 28 pirogue, that bow is up in the air, you can't see nothing if you don't have the experience. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's because that you know, these fellas then just running and they don't care, because a couple of years ago, my boat went skyrocketing in Stone High, and a guy do the same thing, and he's running with a 150 and running to my pirogue, mash it up. My brother then spent 3 days in the hospital. He was walking the boat.
Oh Lord.
So these guys them do, and they see the boat coming to them, and they're flagging on this boat, you know, making noise, and the guy still ain't see the way he's going.
Caller, thank you.
People have to be aware of what they're doing.
I 100% agree with you, caller. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for updating us on that. I was aware of the incident that took place, but I'm glad you shared more details. All I heard was a boat collision, but you're sharing more details as per the actual specifics. We have a caller on the line with us from Faisabad. Good morning, caller.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Yes, I called back to correct some misinformation that has been sent out, because as far as I know, the union and the company together with the ministry would have got at upper management, middle management, and then they would have reached down to the regular employees. So you guys shouldn't spread misinformation. That is not true at all. All the reports, the Lashley reports, all the reports show that Petrotin should not be closed down. The refinery should not be closed down. It should be restructured. There's reports on it that you guys should get access to. In the Freedom of Information Act, you will see that Gary Aboud, the Fisherman and Friends of the Sea, obtained one, and they show you what Petrotin was very productive until 2019. Very, very, very productive. So you see, gentlemen, do all the research now. Don't come out here and spread misinformation.
Caller, I think you are completely misguided and you've completely misinterpreted where Sean Michael Small and I were coming from. Hold on, caller. I've given you the opportunity to speak. If you would give me the opportunity to now correct you. We were not speaking about whether or not Petrotin should have been restructured or closed down. And if you followed this program before, you would have known that we've gone into detail. I don't know how you've confused what we were speaking about. We were speaking about the role of the union.
All right.
Yes. So thank you. Yeah, I know your point that you make, and there are a number of reports that are available. I attended many meetings previously before this shutdown.
I made the point that they said the union wouldn't agree, but the union sat down and agreed on the restructuring.
Yes, caller.
That is the misinformation.
Caller.
All right,
caller. Thank you very much.
My previous job was literally to follow the news. So I followed the 3-year-long saga of negotiations, if my memory serves correct, and maybe it's not. But I do remember the stages of the union's negotiations. Now, arguments could be made that Petrotin should still be operational. But at the end of the day, the unions communicated what they communicated, the government communicated what they communicated, and I was merely responding to another caller's example where, given his example, I did not think any scenario like that, the union would have responded in a positive way. And to some extent, that is what actually happened. Whether or not Petrotrin should have been closed down or not is a separate, is actually, believe it or not, a completely separate conversation. Because based on what was publicly available in the press, the unions did not want pay cuts, which was the initial point of contention. Then they did not want retrenchment the following year, which was the second point of contention. And then by the third year, the government said, well, closing down is on the table. And the union was basically saying, please don't close down. Please don't shut down the refinery, right? So yes, they could have wanted to restructure the refinery, right? They want to be involved in the refinery. But their negotiating tactics, I think at the end of the day, usually the government would have said, well, this is unpopular, we can't do it, so let's appease the union. But unfortunately, that usual tactic hit a brick wall of, for whatever reason, whether good or bad, the government felt the need to do things this way, and they weren't going to give in to the union's demands on that matter anymore. So,
caller, we have another caller on the line with us, but you know, caller, I will tell you that I am also very much aware of of the OWTU's proposals to the Petrotrin board in respect to whether or not they can close down or restructure. But anyway, call on the line with us. Good morning, and we've lost the caller. All right.
Well, with that said,
hold on, Sean Michael Smo. We do have another caller with us. Good morning, caller.
Yes, caller. Okay.
Good morning, Kijan.
Good morning.
Sean.
Morning.
I'm glad in Tobago so that you could do some more research on your time off. Let me say this about the budget, the THA budget that Mr. Augustine read yesterday. I'm not blaming. Mr. Augustine is following a narrative that started way before his time with the PNM THA. They always read what you would call it, a deficit budget. They always read a budget that was way above what was the norm for them in terms of what the central government allocated to them. They always did that. And for the life of me, I can't understand why it is that they would just, you have an idea of what the state is giving you, and budget and read a budget according to that. The only thing I agree with them is that they need more money for development. In the development side of the budget, I think Tobago needs a little more money for development, because I personally think that even though Tobago seems to be, when you drive around Tobago, the roads and everything look good in Tobago, the drains look good. What they need in Tobago, they need to develop the port in Tobago. That really needs some development. I can't see little islands like Antigua and St. Lucia, and when tourism season, when you look there, you see 4 and 5 cruise ships park up on the harbor in the capital, and Tobago could only hold 1 cruise ship or sometimes 2 cruise ships, and not big ones. So in terms of development budget, they need to get some more money for development. But as far as the rest of it goes, they need to come down to reality. Have a good day, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Cole. Thank you very much.
Well, caller, the catch is, if he doesn't put a 5.8% estimate at 3.9 billion, something like that, recurring expenditure is 2.8. It's going to basically take up the budget, the allocation that he gets.
Well, Sean, let's hold on to that point. We have a caller on the line with us from Chagones. Good morning, caller.
Morning, caller.
Good day, gentlemen.
Good morning.
You all left like a bash union. Petrotrin problem was nothing was wrong with the refinery. The reason the refinery was losing money is because the government brings some dubious things like the gas to liquid plant,
yes,
which Malcolm Jones thing, and when the permanent secretary objected to it. That is a man they call Andrew Jupiter, who teaches petroleum engineering at UWI. He was moved to Works Department. Where you put in this? Eh? And you want the union to give up salary when all you need to do is move them stupid interference by government? I explained this to you a number of occasions before, but like passed through on property tax. The problem with property tax is the government have destroyed it. Property tax, as I explained to you, we had 3 property taxes at Independent. One for local government services, one for sewer services, and one for water services. Destroyed all this thing. We had a local government reform, which mentioned nothing about property tax, except that the regional authorities should get the government land and building tax. Instead, government went and do the opposite, and I have asked your colleague on a number of occasions, why? And she said, well, they consult. What do you mean consult? The government put up money to investigate it. That body said, yes, you could go and buy a copy in the government printing. But somebody come against that, but that is hidden. I don't know about Tobago. Right, the next basket key. Tobago decided not to work. Everybody there is employed in the URP. When I was a boy, every holiday I used to go to Tobago. When I come back with food. Right? Tobago used to plant endless food. Then you had a hurricane in Florida. The government started to help them, and they stopped planting food in Tobago. These are the problems. I explained all these things to you before. But you go through one ear and come through the next. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kora, for your time. Thank you. Have a good day. All right. So I think there needs to be some clarity. To the caller from Faizabad, I think we will always have difference of opinions. It's not misinformation. We were speaking about the union's roles and the likelihood of things happening in respect to the closure of the refinery. I'm very much well aware as per the arguments of restructuring. I'm also aware of the issues surrounding Malcolm Jones and the $109 million US gas to liquid plant. I think Petrogen took Malcolm Jones to court over this. So that contributed heavily to the death in Petrogen. I understand everything the callers are saying. Sean Michael Small, I don't know if you recall this, but unions actually made a proposal. OWTU said staff are willing to take a 10 to 15% pay cut in order to keep Petrogen running. That 10 to 15% will be used to pay off the $805 million US debt. Do we still have the caller on the line with us? All right, good morning, caller. Final caller for the morning. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
That's the special caller they're speaking of. Oh, Lord. Good morning, caller.
Good morning. Am I speaking to the Minister for Tobago Affairs?
No. You're speaking to Sean. Go ahead, caller. Go ahead.
Don't get me in trouble now, Mr. Cascade, Mr. Digoma, Mr. Blanchard, Mr. Woodbrook.
Gentlemen, every morning I look at this program, I believe there's hope for Trinidad. Because the people who call into this program are people who clearly have the well-being of the Republic at hand. And it tells me that if this group of people who believe they are good people and are prepared to do good for the good of the Republic, anything is possible. But what we need are to find many, many more minds like these, the people who call on this station, to encourage them to leave the comforts of their believing that they are too good to do good for the Republic. I want to say this morning that as we speak to the future of Trinidad and Tobago and the issue of the political parties and young people, that young people need to come forward in droves. They need to come forward and accept the responsibility, the burden of responsibility, that the elder people, their parents and grandparents, accepted over the last 100 years in building this republic. If this republic falters, it is not because of the 2 keys. That might be part of the journey. But if this republic falters and becomes ashes, it has to do with the fact that young people whom we invested heavily in educating and preparing for leadership fail to come forward and take their rightful places in the politics of the country. Too many people have convinced our young politics is a dirty thing. Politics is only a dirty thing when dirty politicians practice politics. But those young people that I'm appealing to this morning, whether through their parents or through a neighbor or whatever, have got to begin to speak to young people and say to them, now is the time. Join a serious political party. I'm not telling you to join the mustard or the ketchup, because in my view, that represents yesterday's bad story. What we have to do is to find a new political instrument, and young people must fashion this instrument to save this republic from what is staring in its face. Gentlemen, I'll say it to you like your friends in Shogunas. You have any questions for me?
I have many questions for you, caller, especially when you said there is hope, but I'm going to pause on that for now because we are out of time. Thank you.
All
very
puns
much.
intended.
Have a great day.
All the very best to you. Sean Michael Small, yes, you were saying.
I just want to get in one last point on Naveen Jindal and whatever matters he might have in the Indian courts. Minister Young made an interesting point. It's not that it excuses the situation entirely, but there are local politicians that matters before the courts. And I think at some point on both sides of the aisle. And at some point, you know, we, the media, can't give opinions on those situations as though they are confirmed convictions. So to some extent now, we look at this situation, well, again, innocent until proven guilty, how far do we go? That said, government should have done its due diligence, right? The fact that Dr. Raleigh wants to say, I don't know, that is the worst possible thing he probably could have said in that moment. And it's actually even worse, I think, for him to not know, as opposed to for government to be aware and saying, well, based on what is known, it's reasonable still to proceed, as opposed to, oh, he has a court matter. I didn't know he had a court matter. So wait, you just make business deals and get in bed with anybody, and it is what it is. Could it still be a benefit to the country? I don't know now, because it seems as though how they're handling it might be all wrong.
Well, to all our callers, thank you very much for your contribution this morning. Last caller from Cascade, the very special caller, he said it best. We know that when you call in, you have the best interests of TNT at heart, and we will all have disagreements, but the good thing about it is we all have opinions. It's now putting our minds to good use, putting our minds constructively. So to everyone who called in, we thank you very much for your contribution this morning, and thank you very much for really wanting the best for TNT. Sean Michael Small, the weather seems to have settled a bit. So
it dipped back down. It's overcast again. I'm sad.
You're in Tobago. That's all that matters, my friend. You're in Tobago. So enjoy it. Well, I guess we'll see you tomorrow.
Of course.
All right, Sean. Well, I'm Keaton Shaw. Sean Michael Small. Today is a good day. No matter what you may think, and no matter what they may tell you, it's a good day to have a good day. And we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Young at heart, purpose-driven, patriot even. When you like to party, but are still passionate about discussing important issues, the only place where your needs will be met is WESN Content Capital.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference. The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former Mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's. WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook. Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Greendot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 17, Bmobile 107, Digicel 21, ICNTT 105, and Flow 110. Connect with us at WESNCC or stream online at www.wesncc.com. WESN, your premier platform for Caribbean content.
MPs, the newly elected and the re-elected arriving here. A bit of an anecdote: as they go up the steps into the building itself, they turn around for photographs, and the photographers ask them systematically to give them their name and where it is they're elected, just to give you an idea of just how many unknown faces there are elected in the 577 new MPs. Now, as they head inside, they'll be discovering, many for the first time, the National Assembly itself and their seat in the hemicycle. So it is, of course, a deal of emotion and tradition that will be residing today. They will also be finding out, receiving their their official telephones, their official tricolor scarves that they'll be wearing for official events, but not yet necessarily being distributed the keys to the offices, because the keys to the offices aren't yet being decided on until the formation of the parliamentary groups is decided on, and that gives you an idea of just how much uncertainty, despite the arrival of the MPs today, how much uncertainty does still remain here at the National Assembly.
And is there any sense where you are among those you might have spoken to as to what they think could be the likely scenario regarding a coalition?
Well, the MPs are speaking to some of the journalists in the courtyard here of the Palais Bourbon, and there's a lot of shrugs, it has to be said, for some of the first arrivals about what exactly is likely to be the future of the government here in France. There's a desire from one MP that we spoke to turn the page on the very tense past 3 weeks, but on the other hand, another MP from the National Rally said it's impossible to predict who will be the Prime Minister by the 18th of July. That's when the next session of the National Assembly will open. We've been hearing from some of the different political parties themselves. Perhaps they're not in a position of power, but the centrists, of course, of Renaissance, of Ensemble, of the Macron governing coalition, well, they do have some weight still in the National Assembly, given, of course, they did better than expected. One of their MPs said they would be refusing to make any coalition at all with the extremes of both the left and the right. So clearly that will exclude them working together with the France Unbowed. Perhaps most interestingly, though, is the view of the new Popular Front. One of the MPs that we have been hearing from said that the uncertainty may actually have an advantage for French politics moving forward. With the three main groups now installing themselves into the National Assembly, that does actually hand power back to Parliament. Remember, here in France, in the Fifth Republic, the presidential system, many of the presidents, Emmanuel Macron himself included, have been criticised for monopolising too much power. Forcing him into this cohabitation, this sharing of power, is likely to enable a change of policy in the months ahead.
Luke Brown reporting there from the National Assembly. It's time just to ask my two guests quick questions. First to you, Professor Murray, because we're running out of time. Coming back to President Macron's grand strategy, the aim obviously being to allow the far right to rule the country for 3 years before the 2027 presidential election, in the hope they would fail. Given what's happened, is it not that his strategy is the one that indeed has been a victim or has failed massively here?
I think letting the far right rule was plan B. I think plan A was getting the parties to work together to using the far right and the fear of a far right government to force them to cooperate. There has been some progress on that front, but it has certainly not been an entirely successful gambit.
And Mark Perelman, we've talked here about July 18th being the key date on the parliamentary calendar, which is when the Assembly is supposed to meet for the first time. So what does that date mean for these coalition talks?
Well, let's hope there is already some progress by July 18th, because this is in 10 days. And the Leftist Alliance said they would present a candidate for Prime Minister this week. July 18th is, yes, when there's the official session of the new parliament will begin. They have to elect the Speaker, and then in the ensuing day, the Bureau of the National Assembly, Vice Presidents, the heads of the Commission. But this is parliamentary work. This will also obviously depend on how the coalition work has progressed, because you will also need some majorities for all those positions. But Emmanuel Macron is leaving for a NATO summit for 48 hours in Washington tomorrow night. When he comes back, one can assume that there should be at least a candidate for Prime Minister, and that there'll be already some progress on forming a coalition, a minority government by the time Parliament reconvenes on July 18th. We'll have to figure out how long they reconvene, because it didn't escape you that summer break is upon us, and we'll have to see if there is a special session of Parliament. Maybe the MPs will prefer a break than entering into very difficult times.
After the last 4 tense weeks, I suspect they're all going to be putting their hand up for a traditional French summer break.
But they need to know where they're going. So.
That's true indeed. I want want to thank both my guests, Professor Murray from the University of London and also Mark Perelman, our French politics editor, for joining me and doing their absolute brilliant best and explaining to you, the viewer, as to what indeed is coming up next. And when we talk about coming up next, in terms of this is it for this edition, stay tuned for France in Focus.
There's day-to-day reality, and then there's superior reality. That's what André Breton's Surrealist Manifesto was aiming for, an artistic and spiritual revolution.
This text was explosive, a poetic grenade.
Surrealism rejects reason, logic, and even language, all of which its acolytes believed obscured deeper, more mystical truths.
Le surréalisme est avant tout un mouvement de libération de la poésie.
A dive into the subconscious that produced some of the 20th century's most avant-garde and troubling works of art.
Surrealism is the victory of the imagination.
100 years on, its legacy still infuses art and culture. Paying tribute to French poet Guillaume Apollinaire, credited by many as the inventor of the term surrealism, the manifesto establishes the main principles of a movement that was to stretch into the 20th century.
The poet André Breton wrote the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924. Initially, it was meant to be the preface for a collection of poems. Then he made it a standalone text, and it became a sort of trigger for a movement that spread across Europe and eventually across the globe.
In the early 1920s, this Parisian cafe was a regular haunt for artists, the Closerie des Lilas. It's where Breton and the founder of Dadaism, Tristan Tzara, had an argument and Surrealism was born. The movement was heavily influenced by the ideas in Freudian psychoanalysis, which Breton and fellow poet Louis Aragon had recently discovered.
In France, it was artists and poets who were the first ones to introduce the concept of psychoanalysis, and it was via surrealists like Breton and Aragon that its ideas were discussed. They both came from a medical background, but they turned to the arts, to revolution even. They were defectors.
The manifesto was written in the wake of the First World War. André Breton saw the bloodbath up close and observed the mental torment of the wounded soldiers he treated.
Breton was called up in 1915, and because of his time at medical school, he was sent to hospitals. He was in various barracks, but we do know that during one of the major offenses in the Somme, he served as a stretcher bearer, so he saw those heaps of dead bodies piled high.
A rejection of the folly of war, Surrealism was also influenced by 19th century symbolist painting and shared some of the nonsensical features of Dadaism. One of the nascent movement's central ideas was automatism, a practice Breton developed with fellow poet Philippe Suppot.
On ne pourra comprendre le surréalisme que si on se met dans la place de jeunes gens qui veulent absolument se révolter et en même temps créer une atmosphère poétique nouvelle.
Their collaborative text, The Magnetic Fields, spearheaded automatic writing. It aimed to suppress the artist's consciousness during the creative process.
How can you transpose that idea to a visual format? It took artists a few years to work it out. In the end, it was Max Ernst, the German artist, who found a way to produce art that was not driven by reason. That's how he invented the frottage technique. It involved laying paper over an old wooden board, rubbing on the paper, and seeing forests and monsters appear.
The movement had a double mission: to establish a new aesthetic and bring about the overthrow of oppressive structures like capitalism.
Surrealism has always had two main pillars. On the one hand, it refers to Karl Marx's slogan, change the world, that is, take action when it comes to the socio-political reality of the present day. And the other pillar is a poetic one, that is poet Arthur Rimbaud's Change Your Life.
The manifesto also asserted that surrealist activity follows no conventional plan, has no specific direction. Nevertheless, its author did emerge as a natural leader.
C'était l'homme peut-être le plus surréaliste dans un sens, l'homme qui faisait la loi parmi nous. Et moi qui n'aimais pas beaucoup d'être mené. Mais j'acceptais Breton dans tout ce qu'il faisait. Je lui faisais confiance.
Nicknamed the Pope of Surrealism, André Breton put his doctrine above all else, even when it meant breaking with other high-profile artists.
Obviously, being quite strict, at times he came up against other artists for whom surrealism had become more of a commercial concern. That was the case with Dali in particular.
Au point de vue poète, c'est peut-être un des plus médiocres de tout le monde surréaliste. Il a découvert le mécanisme de la poésie dans tous ses manifestes parce qu'il se disait comment on doit faire pour être poète. Et alors c'est ça ce qui a fait qu'il a défini merveilleusement le surréalisme.
Dali's artwork was to define surrealism in Spain as the movement spread across Europe to Latin America, the Middle East and Asia. Yet much closer to its Parisian roots, a very distinctive school of surrealism was taking hold in neighbouring Belgium.
At one point, Belgian artists like Magritte, Belgian gallery owners, went to Paris because there was really something happening there. Cultural and artistic exchanges, and they wanted to be part of the action.
René Magritte emerged as the Belgian surrealist par excellence. His painting, The Treachery of Images, shows an ordinary object with an incongruous slogan.
Magritte and his contemporaries use a very figurative, visual language. It's quite personal, but also very close in technique to the old masters. These are simple objects that everyone's familiar with. It's easy to read. It's strange, but not too strange. At the same time, the viewer can see that there's another world hidden within.
As well as showcasing Magritte's disquieting canvases, this exhibition includes subversive work from the women who were key contributors to the movement: Toyin, Dorothea Tanning and Leonor Fini.
These women took advantage of surrealism's libertarian spirit and of the circles they were moving in. They weren't exactly invited to be members of the group, but they seized the opportunity to embrace that freedom.
Manipulating images to create new realities was not only a question of oil on canvas. The development of lighter, more sophisticated cameras in the early 20th century meant that pictures could be automated like poetry. Surrealist photography forged ahead and was often used in the service of the fashion industry, while designers like Elsa Schiaparelli wove surrealism into her creations.
Dreams have always been a big part of surrealist photography, and it's a departure from a simple representation of real life. It's funny because if you look at this photo taken by Man Ray for Harper's Bazaar at that time, you can see that he's put a recent painting of his in the background. And it's worth pointing out that photographers, notably Man Ray, a surrealist, was earning his living at the time thanks to the fashion industry. Thanks to magazine shoots. He wasn't living from the sale of his artwork.
And since couture houses specialize in the confection of fantastical, dreamlike worlds, surrealism and fashion are a natural match.
One thing that the world of fashion and the surrealists have in common is their sense of humor, especially when it comes to getting a message across. A humorous way of saying, open your eyes, or open your third eye, the one that opens up when we dream.
I'm trying to, again, continue a tradition of the surrealist movement and find my very modern approach to it.
Marcus Schaefer's black and white portraits have graced magazine covers and gallery walls alike. The artist says he's inspired by the movement's universal ideals.
I came across the movement and I dived into it, and then I started reading parts of the manifesto of André Breton, and then I think it was just the beginning of me trying to spend more thoughts on how I photograph, going beyond the idea of shooting the exact likeness of something. You know, there's a timeless momentum that photography has. You're able to create your very own reality. At the very core of the idea of surrealism, it's linked to psychic automatism, which in other word is linked to subconscious, which in other word is linked to something that every single person on this planet practices every day, which is dreaming.
Certain themes and forms are echoed in Marcus's sculpture and painting too. With photography, he uses special techniques. For example, layering images to make composites, a nod to the surrealist collages. He also uses multiple light sources and distorting materials to go beyond a simple, flat depiction.
When it's about taking potentially a surreal portrait of a person, and for me, I guess I'm not trying to focus on one specific thing. What I'm trying to do usually is trying to capture multiple layers. And by doing so, in my idea, I am able to dive into this subconscious level of someone's essence. What I like capturing in one image is basically the past, the present, and the future. And I mentioned that earlier, right? This one in particular, there's one person that I capture in a shot that could have been like 20 seconds, I guess. But there's so many moments that you capture in this one image.
Images that cast doubt on our